Coming up, when Joe Tsai speaks, Brooklyn Nets fans everywhere open up their ears and ponder. Could a new direction actually be coming much sooner than we anticipated? We dive in on the latest, all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. Thank you as always for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And Doug, off-season, draft, NBA playoffs, who cares, obviously. But the Brooklyn Nets may have a potential narrative shift here if we want to read the tea leaves of the latest Joe Tsai comments regarding his organization.
Yeah, look, the NBA news cycle never stops. It's what makes the sport awesome, in my opinion. It's you get the games, which for the most part have been the playoffs have been okay. Playoffs have I will say, have just been kind of okay in the aggregate. There's been some good ones lately. And then also you get Joe Tsai speaking at, I'm going to call it like a financial event that possibly was sponsored by JP Morgan. We haven't been able to deduce exactly where these quotes came from. We know on Twitter they originally made the rounds coming from Nets Press IG over on Twitter that posted, which I think is a pretty good scoop because he pulls a specific Tsai quote that comes out of this like sort of larger financial talk. And I'll just read the quote here, and then we can kind of dissect what we think it could mean or does mean or might mean. But the quote from Joe Tsai is, "I want to build a winning mentality and culture that's sustainable. Those are two very different things. If you just want to win now, you could ruin your future by trading away all of your assets. But I think what I want to do with the Brooklyn Nets is take a longer term approach." And I'm just going to kind of finish off the quote. So when you first heard these quotes from Joe Tsai, this quote from Joe Tsai, like what was the immediate thing that sort of ran through your head?
And this was just, as you mentioned, part of the larger JP Morgan Global China Summit in Shanghai. So he's coming from overseas on this one, dropping it all in there. My initial thought is, it's funny. Initially, I go, oh, okay. So they're going to do it. They're going to trade for the pick control back. They're going to consider moving some real players here. Like this is when it all goes down. Then I backed off for a second and just kind of took it. If you redigest Joe Tsai's comments, it's kind of like there are these two paths that we can choose. We do want long-term sustainability, but if you filter it through the other messages that they put out there, I still, it's funny. I still think you can land back on, and that's obviously why Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson are going to be a core of what they do going forward. It's not hard. You don't have to squint too hard on this. And I think, so for me, the trading for their pick control back, I think could be a reality ahead of the draft, but I don't think it's what a lot of fans jump to. And now Mikal will get traded, Johnson will get traded, and they'll fully reset to a totally young roster right now. I think it's going to be kind of this half and half in terms of agendas going forward.
Yeah, that was my exact thought too. And I think because my initial take on it was, oh, wow, like this is a definitive sort of reset talk. But the thing is, we have to remember, and we all get grounded in this, and this is more of like a human psychology thing than it has to do with NBA, is we are anchored in certain thought process so that when something comes up and pulls against that anchor, it will only go through the original thing that it's anchored to. So if you are anchored to, we want the Nets to reset and get all the picks back and go through like this, maybe sort of longer term rebuild that goes through the draft. If that is already your anchor, then you will then take these quotes and then filter it and it will go through that. If it's like, oh, I want Donovan Mitchell because he's a younger, like sort of star and it'll pair along beside Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson, then that will be what you hear. Right. Yeah. And then if you just want another superstar and you're like, that's the way to winning, these Joe Tsai quotes will go through that and say, that means trading it all for an absolute great guy, because we know that will sustain a winning culture long-term. So it is funny. I had to catch myself for sure, because you're right. He doesn't say anything definitive here, except that sort of kind of talks about things the Nets have already been talking about.
Right.
But you just have to, it's why it's important to make sure you are running it through your own filter to say, what does my own filter tell me it's saying versus what this is actually saying? So, and I have other thoughts on that, but like, I don't know. Does that seem like it encapsulates sort of like how you originally interpreted it as well? you're like, oh, it just means this. And you're like, well, hold on a second. Maybe that's not exactly what it means.
And as if you follow the podcast, obviously Doug and I have been kind of on the same page. Hey, let's trade for our own pick control here. Let's reset this thing now. That's been our agenda. And then we've also acknowledged there's these other paths you could take. So by that same logic, you hear the Joe Tsai quotes, I go, boom, full reset. And then, 5 minutes later, you go, well, hold on a second here. Let's also add in the other factors that they were just moments away and still can be in pursuit of a Donovan Mitchell or that type of player this summer. So it'd almost be jarring to go from, they're going to trade all the Suns picks to get a star and they're ready to move, to then hearing Joe Tsai's comments and believing, oh no, actually they're going to do hard pivot here and reset the entire timeline. So,
well, the one thing about it though is, actually, sorry to interrupt you, but look, the one thing just to piggyback that is where he does kind of like place the part of that anchor correctly is when he says trading. He does definitively say trading away all of your assets. Like, so there is a part of this where he does acknowledge this one specific mechanism by which Nets fans have talked about. We talked about this for ad nauseum, is what to do with these future assets. So he does actually, he could have just said, you don't want to sell your future to pay for your present. Like that would be a more sort of broad way to say the same thing. When he says, don't trade all of your assets away for this, that is actually something of a definitive statement about maybe what not to do. So that's like the one part where you're like, this isn't just random business speak.
No.
It's this, we are speaking about this one mechanism by which there might be an existential crisis happening within the Nets organization of sort of like about what to do with these assets.
And by the way, though, that's also firsthand account of it, specifically when you look at James Harden and acquiring him. So this is not only about, because now you don't have your own picks. We all know that you have Phoenix picks, but they are very valuable assets. You don't just want to trade them away. It's also reflecting on, because we also did it. And when we did it, it ultimately did not work out. And now we don't have them. So, and like, I think this is important. We often talk about the front office ownership, maybe not fully absorbing the points along the way that they made key mistakes. Even if in totality you pull back and say, well, you'd always make this decision or that decision, that player, that talent. Once you get beyond the superstar era in Brooklyn that was unsuccessful, you need to have some reflection back. And right now, I would say out of those comments, it would be, right, we really believed in the Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving era. We thought James Harden was the over-the-top move, but the risk, regardless of it being right to go get him in the moment, the risk of giving up all those future assets, we now can see it. It's right in front of us here. Not having that control could be very damaging. So, coming up here in just 1 second, are the Brooklyn Nets going to make the pick swap with the Houston Rockets to regain the control of their immediate future? We'll talk about that and the roster coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience, the formula for winning championship. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle, level it up to peak performance, superchargers, exhaust kits, roof racks, LED headlights, so much more. Maybe you're into speed, maybe you're into power, maybe it's style, maybe all three. eBay Motors has you covered. They got 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. With the eBay Guaranteed Fit, the parts are guaranteed to fit your ride every time. Or, you'll love this, your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP. There you go. Bring home those huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, reflecting on the comments from Joe Tsai, and if in fact it does have an immediate impact on what the Nets choose to do. So we can get into the roster piece of it, although I think we said there at the top, you and I both agree, getting a little over your skis if you thought his comments are going to lead to Mikal Bridges being traded in a full roster reset in many ways this offseason. However, we've heard that Houston wants to call Brooklyn again and get into these conversations. Do you think that that's coming? Do you think the pick exchange is coming back here? And I'll even add in the caveat, because it's the third overall pick, obviously. Houston, I think, also has the 12th overall pick in the upcoming draft of their own as it currently stands. So while 2024 may not be the sexiest draft class, if I can get all my pick control back and maybe a little something extra, listen, have fun waiting on Phoenix 3, 4, 5 years from now. We do need to figure this out if you're the Nets sooner than later.
I mean, if I had a bet on it now, at like even odds, I would say no, they don't.
Okay.
They don't get it back. I want to specify the odds here because that's not me saying it's not going to happen. I'm saying if I were to make a bet and where the money's even on both sides, I would take the no side of that odds, and then we could just. I think that it's somewhere in the range of outcomes for sure. This quote by Tsai does make me probably push the odds higher than I thought they would be that they would do it, right? Because I think it does that. But I mean, to the Nets' credit here about sort of like where they are compared to what we think they're doing. I was thinking about this the other day. They really haven't made any moves one way or the other. Like, so I think actually the range of outcomes is wider than we think. I think it's all been framed through what people think is going to happen and some like what a few things that have happened in the past, a few things that haven't happened, and some like Sean Marks quotes. But in reality, the Nets haven't like done anything either way. They haven't made the trade for the superstar or even come close, it appears.
Right.
And they haven't traded their stuff away. Like they are the very definition of sort of sitting in neutral gear here. And I do wonder, like, I think credit to the organization at this point for not doing it either way. Because I think if I were to guess now, I actually think they're probably closer to like
waiting until 2025, doing absolutely nothing, and then having money to spend.
Yeah, exactly, and having it open both ways. I think that like that is actually what they've set themselves up for. That they might not even have decided exactly which because they're not sure based on the landscape, and that actually is good decision making. Like that actually, to me, represents probably something like a good holistic determination around like what the best path forward is.
So this is the funny part too, because using the analogy you had earlier about an anchor, and then you only filter things through what you have been anchored to. Well, the other part of that is you and I have talked about needing to reset it. But then when I've also filtered things through, I have included the idea of what the other narrative was. Well, they're going to go get Donovan Mitchell this offseason, and then next offseason they're going to add to that even more. They're going to use all the picks, etc. But that premise says they're getting someone this summer, that was a part of their plan. And that's also speculative. When you look at the fact, knowing that Ben Simmons' money is going to come off the books after the upcoming season, even if they re-sign Nicholas Claxton, they're still going to have significant money next free agency. For the first time in years, they will just have money outright to spend in free agency. And that might be the most prudent path forward. Now, whether or not Donovan Mitchell re-ups with Cleveland, and that takes him off the board next offseason, so be it. There'll be other players available there. And then from that point forward, you have Mikal Bridges, you know where his contract's going to be, et cetera, et cetera. So you can at least go to next season, I think, off-season, I should say, look at the market, see who you can attract, believing that Mikal Bridges is going to be a key contributor to that core as well. And if it doesn't work out, if the next couple of seasons, then you can make decisions about your roster overall and what you want to do. And that I think is only based on if you swing and miss in free agency and guys choose not to come to Brooklyn. But that, I would say that probably does feel like where the organization has anchored itself and is willing to wait for 2025. We see where it stands. And if it doesn't work, then yes, Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, everybody goes. If it does work, maybe we actually open up kind of this transitional window where we're competitive, we're making the playoffs, and also passing the baton, hopefully, to some of the young guys that we're grooming behind the scenes.
And the risk with that is, right, is that you diminish there's diminishing returns on assets that you already had that you could have traded away. Now,
of course,
it's like, okay, you lose, it's another year of Bridges, sort of like great contract, and he gets a little older, everyone gets a year older, and everyone's maybe just a little less, DFS everything's just a little less attractive. I will say the counter to that would be there's probably some not too difficult calculus to do around the risk is actually worth the reward if the other things materialize, like if a Giannis came available, right? Or like one of these like great, like a Tatum or something. Like I don't think it's going to happen, but like these guys that are set to hit free agent, not Giannis so much, but some of these guys that are set to hit free agency or might just ask out, that the diminishing value of an extra year on these guys would have been worth it to hold on. Like the depreciation was worth it, right? Whereas like you'll never get another chance if you were to trade them now. And I think that you could probably do some organizational calculus on, well, we understand it could be worth less, but it might be our only opportunity for an actual swing for the fences move around one of these guys that just don't come available. And I actually think that I could hear that. Like if that was the explanation, for waiting, that would actually be fine for me. I really would believe that. I'd say, okay, and I will never know, and you'll never know exactly what was available and what wasn't. But the more I think about it, I do think that is like sort of correct if that was the thought, because it would be like, well, you only get other chances at these other superstars one time, and trading all these guys away now would not give us that chance. And we just wouldn't be able to, and we wouldn't want to do it and wouldn't be able to do it. Now, the other calculus might say like, okay, well, 2025 is this generational draft, and we might not have another time to draft a Ace Bailey or a Cooper Flagg or whatever, right? And that's another piece of it. And maybe that won't be available either. This is tough. This is where the Nets are in a tough decision-making spot for these exact reasons.
Well, and it's funny too, because it's when you go and you look over at, next year's free agent draft class, there's guys that have player options this offseason. There's guys that'll have them next offseason. But when it's Paul George and Fred VanVleet and Rudy Gobert and Kyrie Irving, old friend Kyrie Irving, but Mitchell right now probably signs the extension. You mentioned Tatum, Jamal Murray, Ingram is on that player options. He's going to get moved. Chris Middleton, Julius Randle, Jalen Brunson re-upped already, but John Collins, even just to run through some of the names at the top or near the top of that list, you go, oh, that's a lot more guys. That's a lot more guys that are just out there and pursuable on the open market,
who might not look, and some of those guys might not look bad as like number twos if you were able to trade.
This is not,
if you're able to trade for the number one, like if you can trade for the number one and then sign the number two in free agency,
yes,
like that is, a Eastern Conference final team. Maybe. I mean, we're doing a lot of like wish casting here, but like it still could be part of what they're thinking.
So, and the other part of it is too, just quickly, because then I want to get to what we ultimately think the path could and should be going forward here in the short and long term, especially with these picks potentially, because I think there is a nice through thread that you could follow and get Brooklyn to a good spot. But I'll also just mention that the other reason whether or not it should weigh in heavily, you don't get Noah Clowney really into the mix until the end of the season, but you really like what you see from him. Now, do you believe in Dariq Whitehead coming back from his injury? Maybe, maybe not. But organizationally, if you push the pause for one more season as well, you can continue to flesh out some of your young bodies. Now, that doesn't mean that you think any of them are going to be superstars, but between Cam Thomas, Noah Clowney, Dariq Whitehead, you want to put Claxton coming back in the mix there. Jalen Wilson's a role player coming off the bench, and then maybe getting back into the mix here with this draft. You could have 5-6 young players that you also want to have another timeline to evaluate or to make look better to use in potential trade packages down the road. So it's just another caveat as to why this can be prudent if the Nets, Joe Tsai, Sean Marks are taking a bit of a wait-and-see long-term approach. We know that sometimes has caused them to miss out on opportunities. Coming up here in a second, what do we ultimately believe will happen as the draft looms next month? We'll break down our future paths for Brooklyn coming up next. All right, so as we tie a pretty little bow on our Locked On Nets episode, go follow at Doug Norrie on X, at Adam Arbach on X, even at Locked On Nets, and over on YouTube, wherever you get those needs fulfilled. Doug, what is your what do you believe will end up being? Let's say at the time of the draft, what do you think the Brooklyn Nets will have done? Putting out there basically pick swapping back with Houston, trading Dorian Finney-Smith to get back into the mix maybe. Let's leave it at that because that's kind of the most viable. And then also Nicholas Claxton, the contract.
What do I think we could see like a guy like DFS move, like he'd probably be like fit right into this like sort of role player for where this draft lands in terms of asset class. And so like if another team just kind of wanted a little bit more of a win now piece and was drafting in the teens or something like that, right, I could see a guy like him move because they just felt like that's basically what the guy's going to become anyway.
Right.
And so we'll just take the guy who we just know can already do, X, Y, and Z. So I can see that. Short of that, I actually don't think they do much. I don't think they reset it here for the reasons I said before around it's not probably worth it to make a full decision right now when you're probably set up to like make a better decision in 2025 with the risk that if this was the one chance to get your picks back and that chance will not exist next year, that's a risk. But if you find out that, Giannis becomes available and you weren't able to trade for him because you did it, that's another risk. Right. So like, and you could have done it and you didn't have, and you could have had like, I keep using Giannis because like, it's just a random guy, but
yeah, but just a player of that profile. We understand.
Yeah. That like could be unhappy and it's kind of over in his current situation. And they're like, hey, we could have traded everything for him and signed Mitchell. And that would have been like a clear championship contender. and now we can't. Like, so I think they're both risky on either side. My guess is we see very little movement, and maybe they get into the first round. Because I think even if best case, the way the Nets are currently set up, they're probably a little bit like they were last year, with just like a few too many guys to actually play.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're thinking, well, Noah Clowney's going to deserve 22 to 24 minutes this year, then guys like DFS can kind of start going.
Oh, of
right.
course. Yeah.
And so that's where like that kind of fits in, I think.
I almost said that last trade deadline. I said they should be moving Dorian Finney-Smith to get him out of the way for not only Noah Clowney to come up, but also because you liked what we were seeing from Jalen Wilson and you wanted him to just get more consistent run. Not that he's player of X caliber or Y. For me, it's interesting. I will say the interesting thing is like where the Nets think the value is in the upcoming draft, getting into it, whether it is trading Dorian Finney-Smith or the pick swap back with Houston. Because the one caveat to this would be, and it's really not a caveat. If you look out and you think that next year is such a solid and deep draft class and you can get back control of it, even if you get a 2024 pick back from Houston, you swap with the Phoenix picks, this team is not going to be dramatically better because it's the exact same roster. So it's a pretty low risk that you take yourself out of the conversation to be back in the lottery again next draft. If that's the case and you move Dorian Finney-Smith and you do the pick swaps with Houston, you don't move Mikal Bridges. You don't move Cameron Johnson. You still keep those guys in place for 2025, the offseason in that draft class. But you could get yourself in a much better spot next year to hopefully land a premier talent. And that would then move your long-term stable outlook timeline 2 years forward, probably, because you were able to get that young talent. Without doing that, yes, you can go to free agency and add players, but you can't add the young other core pieces. That'll still be another 3-4 years away. So you are doing the equation. How competitive can we be by landing free agents until 27, 28, 29, when we'll have some Phoenix picks coming in? Do we believe Phoenix will have totally blown it up by then? That'll be incredibly valuable. Or is this 2025 draft class so valuable that we need to get back to our own pick control? So I think you can do that. Would be my both and version of it. Swap with Houston, move Dorian Finney-Smith, have 2 first-round picks in 2024 to take shots, and have your own 2025 pick to add the premier talent. And then you're still in the same spot in the offseason of being able to sign whoever you want. Your point about too many players for minutes, that's probably something that starts to come into effect here at some point. But I feel like that's what they should want to do here. And it, by the way, serves both agendas of wanting to compete now, but still long-term.
So you're saying that, like, just to make sure I can like sum that up. So you're saying that even if they swap the picks back, but didn't move Mikal, they would still have like a team that would be built to kind of be pretty high in the lottery anyway, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you're not wrong.
Right?
They just with this exact team, they just conveyed the number 3 pick. So it's like, you're not wrong in that assessment. And we've seen teams with a lot more talent just have down years.
Yeah.
Like, because of just circumstance, right? Like Memphis just went through this now. Golden State did this back in the day. They kind of like got super lucky and they had a couple down years in between championships and they drafted Wiseman, Kuminga, and Moody. Now, like, it didn't all work out there, but they had the opportunity to draft pretty high in the draft a few times, right? So we've seen teams kind of do this like 1 year kind of gap year around that. And so, yeah, I wonder if that's a reasonable thing too, because it's not like a Bridges, Cam Thomas, never plays Ben Simmons, and some young guys playing. That team could easily lose 50 games. like without trying. And you just do what other teams do and like don't play all your guys all the minutes in the world, right? Like there's other ways to kind of softly make this happen. And I wonder if like that's a thing that's sort of on their mind too. Like, because I think we've done a thing where it said, oh, trade for the picks back and blow it all up. But that doesn't necessarily need to be the case either. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's like this.
What if that's the best path? I do wonder if that's the best path.
Yeah, it's the middle ground, right? It's like, well, we don't want to tell the fan base we have nobody playing on the roster. We also do want to position ourselves correctly. So that,
but if and when we lose,
yes,
it won't feel the sting of it won't be that bad, because they have to look and say, this roster going into the next year, like the coach. I mean, Jordy Fernandez, is he worth? I mean, God, if he's worth 8 wins, they're still like not that good. Well, like, you know what I mean? Like, and he's, and by the way, it's almost for sure he's not going to be. But it just is funny to think about it that way.
And I hate to do this, but the caveat that anyone would probably throw in, we know plenty of people around the Nets fan base that'll still say it, and he's on the roster, so how could you not? Well, if Ben Simmons is healthy next year,
Oh, come on, stop.
does that? But I'm not, and I put no stock in it, right? But that's what someone would say. Whatever their record was, whatever it was projected to be, if you had Ben Simmons, would it throw it off? And what I will at least assert is the organization might be taking that theoretically into account over this short-term year, right? Like,
there's no way.
What are we going to do with him?
Yeah.
What are we going to do with him? Not. Hey, if Ben Simmons is healthy, we could win a lot of basketball games. Good Lord, there's no way the organization is thinking about that. But they are thinking about, what are we going to do with him? How are we going to manage our way through this? So, we talked about before, you eat some of the contract by the time you get to the deadline. Is there a buyout option there that costs you $35 million, dollars in totality, and Simmons, leaves? So you end up, he takes $5 million off to go somewhere else. You pay almost all of it, but you get him off the roster solely for the purpose of not risking winning some basketball games that you don't think you want to in the long view. So there is that part of it in the mix here. However little I think it actually impacts what they do. But that, for me, that might be, you and I have been on the blow up side of things a little more staunchly. Other people have been on the go get Donovan Mitchell and pursue to win right now. If you cut down the middle of that, it's, hey, make some smart moves and try to put yourself in a spot where 2025 becomes a really fruitful off season for the Brooklyn Nets from a free agency and draft perspective. I'm cautiously optimistic. If it was even money, like you said earlier, I'd say they would make the pick swap with Houston and get back that control.
And just be like, hey, we know that this team is good for 37 wins or something like that. And
Yes,
we'll see where
sorry,
we
by
land.
the way, the other reason being, this past year, they came in saying it's important for us to go to make the playoffs. That's a part of what we want to do. And they saw how the product on the court could not accomplish that. So that's also informative, right? You can't come back to this season and say the objective is to make the playoffs. We believe in this team. Like, we just saw that they're not necessarily capable of achieving that. So then,
and I think it's reasonable to expect they'd be like a few wins better. Like, if you think Jordy is just like a better coach, which he almost for sure is, right? And a instilled off system of like around the offense that just buys them a few more games.
Of course.
And like a few, like Clowney makes a leap, Cam Thomas makes a leap. I think you can talk yourself into more wins. What you really can't talk yourself into, I guess, it is like 10 more wins. I think that is where it gets a little hard. Especially,
and you can't talk yourself into definitely being a playoff team. You can talk yourself into being a play-in team, but you can't.
But you could talk yourself into a few more losses with the idea that this 2025, like they easily could have, they easily could have lost some more games, right? Like if they really wanted to, because they could have just a few things of rest here and there, like a few less minutes, a few more minutes for the young players. Like, there's ways to kind of buy yourself losses. It's gross. I hate that the system is set up like this, so I'm not advocating for the system. I really hate that the NBA, and they've done a better job with it by smoothing out these lottery odds. So, like, it's not so great for you to just be terrible. But in general, I think the system is totally screwed up by even incentivizing this. That being said, it's just the system. And if and plenty of teams have done this, buy yourself a loss here or there. I mean, heck, Dallas bought themselves a few losses, drafted Derek Lively, and the guy plays like real hardcore NBA playoff rotation minutes, right? And
that's a great example. Don't squint too hard and see a guy contributing.
And they got completely dragged for it in the moment.
Yep.
And guess what? They would do it a million times out of a million, knowing how it worked out, because it was like, and now we drafted a guy that we can play, that can close basketball games in certain matchups for us as a rookie. So forget it. Was it worth it? Yeah, it was worth it.
Yep.
Right. So, but yeah, you can buy yourself some losses here and there to increase your odds around like landing real good talent. And that's just the way it is. And like, everyone wants to bring up like these examples of teams that like sucked forever and never stop sucking. And then there's other examples where you are just kind of down for a few years and it works out. And it's like, oh, we got to draft Jonathan Kuminga and we still have all the other guys. And now it's like, that's not too bad. Right. So it's just good to look at sort of everything, I think, in totality.
And there's that difference of, some people saying, oh, you're going to be terrible for another 2 to 3 years at a minimum. Right. But again, to go back to the top in Joe Tsai's comments, long-term success. It's not just winning championships or being in the Eastern Conference Finals. You want that. Of course you want that. but it's also being a team you go, hey, every year they're in the playoffs, right? I mean, the Miami Heat are a great example of this. They're one of the stalwart organizations. They're always in the mix. Now, sometimes they win, sometimes they look a little bit worse, but there's years when you look at them and you go, there's no way they could, whoops, there they are, right back in the playoffs again. I think
the problem with that is, remember, it gets a little harder each time, though. Like every time, because
100%.
you get a little older and you get a little less return on the stuff, and it just gets a little harder. Like, and so that's the other problem too. So we're gonna get out of here, but like,
but the baseline being, you have older talent, but you're also quietly bringing in a couple of younger guys each year.
Yes,
and then those guys get a little bit better. And then you turn it over. And that's the overlap that any really, truly strong organization, beyond even championships, strong organizations find a way to be building the replacements while still loving and promoting and wanting the current to win, right? And the Nets have sometimes traveled in these violent waters of, it's all in for these guys, forget the future. It's all about the past. What happened to the present? And they need to start to get that cohesion about looking at things in a 5 to 7 year timeline, 10-year timeline, not 1, 2, and 3 year windows.
All right, well, there you go. Joe Tsai, we solved it. So just head on over to Locked On Nets, subscribe. I'm sure he is already.
No, he's obviously
subscribe.
Yeah, for sure.
What's that? What'd you say?
He's obviously a subscriber. I mean, come on. Yeah.
I mean, it's like silly for me to even suggest otherwise. But we're going to get out of here. Make sure you, along with everyone else in the Nets organization, is subscribed to Locked On Nets, wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to subscribe to YouTube. You're laughing as if it's not true. We're just going to believe that it is. Subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube as well.
We've been around for so long. Of course, they're subscribing. Work hard.
They probably subscribed a long time ago and forgot. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. So turn the alerts on. That's really what it is. Turn the alerts on. Work hard in silence. Let your success be your noise. That is from one Anonymous.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets and prolific as well.
Yeah.
We'll be back again.
He's everywhere.
Back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. Yeah.